Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on employee monitoring. It is like, whoa, no, it's noon Eastern on the dot, so we are going to kick this off. My name is Holly Dowden, VP of Marketing for Ntiva, and I'm your moderator for today's session. Just one quick reminder before we dive in. If you have any questions during the webinar, please put them in the Q&A section. You're going to see the little Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen, not the chat function. The reason for that is when you do enter your question into the Q&A, you'll notice that you have the ability to keep your name anonymous if you want to do so. And some of you may want to do so given the topic. We have built in plenty of time to answer questions at the end. So put your questions in and we'll queue them up and we'll attempt to get them at the end of the session. And so with that, I would like to introduce our speaker today, who is Brammeier, and Brian is Ntiva's Chief Strategy Officer and is also our Chief Information Security Officer as well. Brian was formerly the CEO of Higher Ground MSP, and he came through us to an acquisition that we made late last year. And so with that, we are just going to dive right in, and I'm going to turn it over to Brian.
Thank you very much, Holly. Good morning for some, good afternoon for others, depending on where you're joining from in your time zone. Today we're going to be talking about productivity monitoring and employee monitoring software. I think we'll find throughout the webinar what those two things really mean, and is there a difference between them? Does it really work? When purchasing or implementing a product like that, what are we really solving for? And what are some common tricks and traps to be aware of during the process? We're going to discuss a few case studies about companies that have implemented productivity monitoring software and what they learned through the experience. And after we're done, we'll talk about next steps. So why is this suddenly a topic? Employee monitoring has been here for many years. Clients have asked us, how do we know if our employees are working when they're working remote? And I think this really boils down to a concept of work from home, but is really transforming into work from anywhere. It's no longer a work from home or work from the office. It could be working from a coffee shop. It could be working from an airplane. It could be working during hours or after hours. And really, what does that mean to individuals? Businesses are more concerned now that we are in a work from home mode. But again, it's not just work from home, it's people are working differently. And I think that you'll see through this webinar that working differently means different things for different employees. In any case, you need a point of view. And I think that's the lens that you will look through productivity monitoring software through. So some questions people are asking now about productivity monitoring and what are we really solving for is, first, are my people goofing off? Can I catch Susie? And we're going to be talking about this mock person, Susie, throughout the webinar, but can we catch someone or Susie goofing off? With Susie, the goal was that the client had questions about whether the employee was actually working. How engaged are they while they're on the clock? And again, clock example is very relative. Normally you would think of during hours as 9 to 5, but is that really true anymore? What's distracting those employees? Where are they spending their time in terms of buckets of time or pockets of software that they use or interacting with certain people or certain processes? How focused are they on their roles? How much are they getting distracted and or pulled into other meetings that might not be core to their job? Who are the top performers and what are some of their best practices and habits? So prototyping, looking at who's your top salesperson, who's your top call center employee, and what are they doing? So to be able to look at their trends, to be able to ask them how they're achieving those results, and then being able to replicate that throughout the organization. And what's stopping others from being top performers, looking at normalized data amongst employees. I'll harp on this particular topic of sales because it's easy. The sales funnel is a common concept. And as you move through, identification of a lead, qualifying the lead, putting them into a quote, negotiating and closing them, you could see as an example where the people are matriculating through the sales funnel and where others are having issues, maybe in quoting or maybe in negotiating, and who might be on the verge of burnout. If you can help identify that issue and discuss with an employee, fix the burnout, you've saved not only the employee headache and hassle and pain, but you've also helped the organization. So some common reasons that companies implement monitoring. And let's start out with something that's not the goal, in my opinion. It's catching employees goofing off. The let's catch Susie example. You were watching Netflix while you were supposed to be doing work. I don't think that that's the goal of productivity monitoring software. Or even, let's just see what we can learn. Throw the software out there and see what we find. Catching a broad net without a fine-tuned goal can yield inconsistent results and might be a bit of a goose chase. What are some better reasons that you could implement productivity monitoring? So moving the monitoring outside of the office. So no longer in a work from anywhere environment can you jump into an employee's office and just pop your head in and say hi. It's now in a situation where people are working from literally anywhere. As we discussed today, I'm at my house. And so how do you know, and how can you help coach people if you don't have the ability to stop in? I make that akin to you're working on muscles that managers might not be used to using. So tools can help them find those areas to communicate better in. Also creating a baseline. If you create a baseline, you can tell when things are traveling outside the norm. Many organizations that run call centers and or have sales teams have baselines already. They have how many qualified leads you should be bringing in on the sales side. You should be trying to complete X amount of customer interactions on the call center side per day, or a certain amount of data entered per day, or on the technical side, X amount of consulting hours produced. So these are not foreign concepts, but it allows you to take those data points and spread them throughout an organization and potentially then automate that. So you could just see the highlights of moving away from standard deviation for that particular role, and just knowing that as a manager, when you see a deviation, look into it. And it might be nothing. It might be they forgot to log in their PTO, and that was the productivity drop. They just weren't there. Or it could just be the employee rabbit holed on a project, and you need to talk to them about what's going on, and maybe bring in other resources or do some coaching. Finding process and training gaps. So when you're looking at, again, the sales funnel, if you have someone who has difficulty quoting or has difficulty negotiating on a sales process, it's something that you can then look at that trend popping out of the data and find your top 1 or 2 people and maybe put them together for a mentoring process or updating in the training process so that everyone has the benefit of the items and processes that the successful people are achieving. Finding data to support and negate hiring assumptions. This is about confirmation bias. We all have them, and using data, especially well-crafted, a wide net of good data, help to alleviate that. We'll talk about that later. As well as spurring adoption of new tools and techniques. So it used to be that companies needed to evolve every couple of years in order to continue to stay relevant. We need now, as people in the tech-enabled or traditionally tech fields, and I think at this point everybody is tech-enabled if they made it to this point through the pandemic. You have to be. That you need to continue to adopt, and this is or adapt, and this is one of those tools. So in short, is it spying that's your goal, or productivity improvement? And spoiler alert, I don't think spying is the way to go. So some pros. There are, in my opinion, and we've done some research on the products that are out there, two tiers of products. There's, call it tier 1 and tier 2. Tier 1 is more about collecting data and just giving you more raw data points. Tier 2 is a pretty wide tier and can give you more insight into information. There are price differences between the two products, but Tier 2 can get really granular. Tier 2, we talked to a company who's doing a proof of concept for Comcast, and they can tell when a new business initiative is executed on that accounting is the department that's slowing the process down. And specifically in accounting, it's this one function, and of that one function, this one person is having difficulty with that process. So it can get hyper granular, even in an organization that has tens of thousands of people. And those are the much more enterprise slated versions of that tier 2 product. But the automated coaching is helpful, where it can give employees general feedback. Especially the tier 2 ones can start to talk about maybe you're spending too much time on a particular area, or at least something to look into. And we'll talk about this later, but it's not just about the metrics. You get what you bonus. So if it's too granular or too focused, you might be also missing the bigger picture. There's also the ability to do alerting. So example from before, redlining. Redlining could be that the employee is working way too much, but it could also mean that they've actually hit redline and they're starting to now go the complete opposite direction fast. They're supposed to be completing 10 calls a day and they're at 2. Well, manager just needs to know about that and determine if there's additional steps that need to be taken. Have a conversation with the employee, review the data. It's helpful to throw the flag. Transparency. If nothing's hidden, then people can share more openly, and more on this later, especially related to sales. Rolls up and fills out existing dashboards. So everyone loves KPIs, everyone loves dashboards. And I think many people now are moving towards touchless, meaning that you're just physically not touching things. Data rolls very easily amongst the consumer, the employees, and so dashboards are becoming quite common. If you have a tool that's aggregating a lot of this data together, it allows you to reduce some of the existing products that are there, but also make more informed decisions. Instead of having data silos, tools like these tools can aggregate the data for you. And the ROI is easy, at least for the tool. So if you can save some time, reduce one redundant process, improve one redlining process for the organization, it's going to pay for itself. So speaking of ROI, let's talk about what that means. What are we looking to solve here? And I think this is a great area to dig into as an organization. This should be one of the pillars. The tools are fairly inexpensive. So the measurable wins are things like increases in productivity, increases in employee happiness and morale, which also means better retention, improving hiring, gives you better data to know about what types of employees are happier in those environments, and how to better articulate how some of the day-to-day might occur for those employees, as well as just providing general insight and information. What's it worth if you were to increase your productivity in your organization by 1%? If you're $1 million organization, that's $10,000 a year. If you do 5%, that's $50,000 a year. So as you continue to linearly increase your size of your org, or even exponentially, the software continues to provide tangible return. As well as what insights could you drive your business with if you had better dashboards? Just some information to think about, and or what information do you think you're lacking? And how has that data changed over time? So having the data available to you, starting to collect some data points, even if you're not using it now, it's helpful in the data science area to be able to at least have the data. So even if you don't think you're going to use it now, it allows you to go back from a historical perspective by using some of these tools and leverage that data for future data analytics. So what are some cons? The big brother culture issue is real. Spying on people is not the answer. As I've discussed earlier, it actually might further offset the ROI from earlier. If you're getting a return based on some productivity, but you're just using it as an intention to spy on your employees, not only does that create a bad culture, but that's not the best use of the application. It'll actually hamper your efforts. And use with disclosure will create frustration. I think it's very important that when you're implementing a product, when you're using it and discussing it for coaching purposes, all throughout that you discuss with the organization, it's important that people understand why you're doing this. I like to discuss often the why. Anytime you're doing organizational change management, it's important to not only discuss the issue, but also the why. Why is this being implemented? Why is this helping the employee? Why is it helping the company? Why is it helping everybody? So when you're trying to get buy-in from people in organizational process change, it's pretty critical to explain that, in my opinion. Micromanaging is also not managing. I actually like to talk to my direct reports and tell them if I start micromanaging, they're probably going to get fired. Use the process. Use the process to manage as opposed to brute force managing. Brute force or micromanaging, it's not helpful, and it often can affect morale negatively. So steer away from that. Use the data to help drive the outcomes and have the data feed into positive outcomes for the employees. Another con is data without context. And if you're just looking at the data example, hey, your productivity, Bob, was really crappy yesterday, not happy about it. And Bob's like, I was off. So back to the PTO example, that's important. Or maybe Bob had a family issue. And if you just jump in and say, Bob, you did a real crappy job yesterday, that's not helpful, it's not productive. But if you use that data point as there was reduced productivity for that day, or you're seeing, more importantly, a trend of that, that'd be a great opportunity for you as your manager to engage with your employee and have a discussion. Hey, Bob, I've noticed that your emails are starting to that need to be responded to have been getting further and further out. It sounds like something might be going on. Hey, what's going on? Are you all right? Is everything okay with the family? And maybe you find out Bob's got a health problem, or maybe someone in his family does. So context is super important. And as managers, that's an important skill to continue to leverage that was more prevalent in the in-person environment and needs to be considered going forward. Creating hot potato escalation issues. So hot potato is kind of the get what you bonus, the Warren Buffett concept. If I say we're looking at how many tickets you closed, and that's how we're going to judge your productivity. Well, if I have the option of working on a ticket I can knock out in 5 minutes, or a ticket I can knock out in 5 hours, and I'm getting bonused or judged on how many tickets I close, most people are going to gravitate towards the quicker tickets to boost the metric. So it's important when you're looking at what you want to measure, that you step back far enough that you get proper context and don't create hot potato issues. I think that's a very important concept. Not only with productivity management software, but also with other data and KPIs in general. There's also legal issues with this too, especially when you start talking about GDPR, if your workforce is outside the United States, as well as other states that are starting to implement their own versions of GDPR, like California, like Illinois and the Illinois Biometric Authentication Act, as well as other, New York has some, that states are starting to come out with that. So it's important that you consult your attorney, I'm not an attorney, to discuss these products and any potential legal issues that may arise as a result of using them. So your data is only as good as the data in. So what are we monitoring? What are we using as inputs? what are we actually measuring? So productivity software like Office 365 and Gmail, we're tracking many different data points. So we're looking at how many emails are coming in. We're looking at how many emails are being responded to. When I mean we, the software products are doing that. They're looking at Teams messages on 365. They're looking at GChat messages and Gmail. They're looking at interactions, and those all can be tuned and or increased in weight or decreased in weight. There's formulas that you can play with in different platforms. Also calendar time. You can also start tying in your critical systems, such as your ERP, CRM, ticketing systems. Here at Ntiva, we use a ticketing system that runs almost all of our day-to-day on the technical side. And as an example, dealing with context, if we were to not include that data, the other remaining data points would be a black hole. So context is really important. Scope is important. Also phone systems. So if you've got a voice over IP system, integration with that's very important because it will show you how much time is being spent on the phone versus working on the computer or other activities. And something to consider there too, cell phones. So if you're using your personal cell phone, that data point might be missing from the context. So I could tell you I often use my cell phone, so that data would be missing from my profile. Desktop applications. So some of these software tools can tie directly into the desktop. Other ones tie in with things like a Chrome plugin and can gather data more granularly based on that. Most software applications now are moving to the cloud. So we can hook into, with these platforms, those third-party services to gather the data directly as opposed to having to have something on the employee's PC. The installed on a computer is a very traditional way to do it, but given the fact that the data is all in the cloud, it makes data collection so much easier to go to the source versus trying to collect it at the endpoint. And the last item, which I actually highlighted as a very key item, is location. Sometimes that's the context is helpful, sometimes not. Does it really matter if you're working from your house versus from the office? Maybe not. And as an organization, you might choose to exclude that data. So one size does not fit all. And there are many reasons. So you might also have scorecards that are already in place, or a couple of them. And culture can be very different from company to company. So not only the intended purpose of the software, but the type of software that's used, the organizational maturity to be able to ingest that type of data and to be able to use it. Just because you got a great platform doesn't mean your managers know how to properly share that data. So looking at different roles in your business, maybe it'll work for certain job types, but not for others. There's different KPIs to look at based on each department as well. So it's best to do this by profile. So an engineer might have a different profile than the salesperson would definitely, and different than an accountant. And all the data points that are collected, the KPIs, the inputs would be different potentially by employee. And so the purpose of this is finding the tool is more a matter of finding what you're measuring and why. The why is really important. What are you looking to get out of the tool as a goal? And so if you're just looking to determine interactions or events that occur, those are great for the tier 1. There's more legwork involved from managers. It's my opinion that for a more mature organization and or a very fast moving organization, the tier 2 add a lot more value significantly faster because they can hint at direction that you want to dig in as a manager, and they call out outliers as opposed to making it more about the individual data points. So how do you make sure you get a win? How do you maximize your success? Again, be open and honest. Talk to the employees, talk to the management team, and explain the why. The why is really important. And explain the goals. Here's what we're trying to achieve. Here are the best practices. Here's the improvements to training we want to build. Here's the team building that's going to come out of this. And here's the visibility everyone's going to have. And explain this is not anything new, just being applied more evenly now. Data collection occurs from many different platforms, even now. So example, Spotlight on the Mac or Cortana or Siri. All those applications are gathering data about you now on your personal devices and work devices to be able to give you better contextual results for things that you might ask for. So all this is happening now. It's just more discussed. And explain what happens when people cheat. There's always ways to game systems, even without types of tools like this in place. Be cognizant about the fact that you're always going to have somebody who wants to try to game the system. Talk about it. Talk about why they don't want to be doing that, and what happens if they do. Be understanding and planning about gamification and leaderboards. So one of the techniques that can be used with this is to have a leaderboard. You could put it up on a TV. You could show real-time statistics for your sales team or your technical team or your call center team in terms of who's doing the most amount of either discrete interactions or has the best overall score based on the input criteria your company has designed. And search for trends outside your initial expectations. And we'll talk about that in some of the case studies next. Is you might have a goal of determining what processes or what people in a particular process are more successful. Example, back to the sales funnel. But you might find other things during that process that you didn't expect. So set a firm goal or a couple goals, but make sure that you take steps back and analyze the data to see if something new comes out. And again, prototype by role. And you can make it universal for that role across your organization, depending on your size. You could also make it departmental and get buy-in from the managers. Ask what's important to them and how they define their success, and just match it to the search criteria. So what are some traps to avoid? The fear of being spied on is one of them. So you can alleviate that by having open conversations with the staff. If you sell it as spying, it's not going to work. If your goals of the platform are spying, it's not going to work. Make sure that your real goals are aligned with what you're sharing with the staff. If you really want to use it to help improve the process, do it. Justification for unexpected and counterintuitive results. Why didn't we already know this? Things that might seem blatantly obvious, and or what do you do when you experience results that are counterintuitive? I think you should have either your existing process should have the managers be able to speak to those items, or have a team in place that focuses on data. And it could just be a committee of existing people. Maybe it's in an existing role. And assuming this is the best thing in the world that's ever happened, the panacea, or that things weren't happening prior. So don't assume that your organization's perfect. No org is, and things are broken right now in every company. If you really take a hard look in the mirror, everyone's got problems. Everyone has things they should be improving on. And again, back to my comment earlier, companies shouldn't be taking years to process improve. They must now be process improving and doing introspection, looking at themselves often and as part of a regimented process. And don't use the data as a stick. Don't just say, here's the data, why aren't you being productive? You have to use peripheral information during the process as a manager, contextual information to have the discussion. Data as the sole source of truth is going to be awkward and likely inaccurate. And data is not, same point, data is not insight. You can't just look at the data and say, oh, I found the smoking gun. Example, the data and the tools will give you trending information and tell you where to dig. It's a treasure map. Sometimes you hit the X, sometimes you don't find anything. but at least it helps focus your time. So example, if you're going to be doing a coaching or a weekly check-in or a monthly check-in with an employee, instead of a general format, you could use a tool to help tell you where to maybe focus your conversation to determine if there's an issue, or determine or to congratulate that they're doing exceptionally well. So the data is not insight. The data helps you point in the right direction. Also, again, not an attorney, but in terms of litigation and legal issues, one area to look at is, what does your employee handbook say? It's important to discuss with your counsel about how that is currently written. Most times as a organization, you have access to your own company data, but it's important to maybe put a blurb in there. And ethics issues too. If you implement the software without telling your employees, and some organizations do that, you could run into an ethical issue. And also, you could run into organizational cultural issues if you do not disclose the information beforehand. Again, I highly recommend that before you put it into production, before you use it with your management team and make it part of your reviews and how you coach and train your staff, openly discuss it, explain the why. It'll save you headache down the road. So, first case study. There are no names here, names of companies or individuals, but the first one was a financial services company. They literally went in with the express purpose of catching a particular employee not doing their work. Again, not the recommended approach. How did they do this? They implemented a system that tracked inputs into their data sources. So things like Office 365, Gmail. They had a interesting aha moment with their staff and hiring. They learned that people who lived balanced lives did much better during the work from home situations, and the office go-getters struggled. Boiled down, that's confirmation bias for people like millennials versus people who have families and or older. The idea that was assumed was if you're a millennial or you're a younger employee, you got a lot of energy and you're showing up to work maybe early, you're staying late, you're going out to the company parties and social activities, and you appear very engaged. Their suspicion was that those employees were better. Well, what happened during the pandemic, people shifted to work from home, and those particular employees actually did worse. The employees that were maybe a more traditional worker with family or kids or both would put in their normal hours, or maybe even spotted throughout the day as they were taking care of their kids or dealing with remote learning, but then they put in a ton of hours after work, so after traditional work hours. So they found that they were actually more productive employees in the work from home environment by offering flex. So that was the learned item out of this, contradicting their confirmation bias. So they just assumed that the newer ones were going to be hungrier, and that wasn't the case. Also, you're going to learn what on the clock means to your employees. So on the clock means many different things. I mean, if you're a line worker at a factory with an assembly line, you punch your card or you walk in and it's very clear. I think what we're seeing is those lines are blurring now, where the workers they wake up, they check email. I mean, I think about myself. I roll out of bed, grab my phone. Is there anything critical? No. Start the coffee. And then as I'm having my coffee and my breakfast, I'll look through the critical emails and start catching up for the day. And then I get into my meetings. And then I will take some time towards the end of the day to get a workout in. And then after my workout, I get caught back up on emails. And I got projects that I'm working on well into the evening. So the prototype of a typical 9-to-5 worker is, I think, fading away. And this did a great job of spinning positively within the organization, despite their original intention. So they actually pivoted well by learning this data and helped their managers better understand how to manage in this environment. And I think that's a common theme that we're going to see throughout some of the case studies, as well as in general, in terms of getting data to the people so they can change their workflow. Great. Number 2 was a media company. Productivity actually just in general declined during work from home, work from anywhere. They implemented some productivity monitoring software, and they uncovered that it was a management issue. Their managers didn't have that muscle memory to be able to lead in this particular type of work environment. I mentioned and alluded to that earlier. They can't helicopter manage. And it's very easy to walk into a room and be able to talk to a person, be able to see what they're doing. And it's kind of management by sight. And you can't do that in a work from home environment. So this particular company is now revisiting their current business model. And they're looking to continue to make changes. And they're also looking to modify some of their attributes for hiring. They use the data from the tool to understand what attributes were more helpful. Not a part of this webinar, but some companies are using employee prototyping tools like Predictive Index. And you ask a bunch of questions, and it tells you the profile or how this person might interact in a particular way during a particular situation. And so finding and prototyping employees that are helpful can be helpful when hiring, because you can ask those questions, you can look at the prototyping during the hiring process to improve chance of success from both sides for a particular job role. So right now they're retraining their managers to be able to specifically work from the work from anywhere environment that they're currently in. So again, 2 positive results that came out of this. Third case study is a sales team for a SaaS company. They're getting inconsistent lead generation, and they were asking questions like, what is the staff really doing? What was really working and for what role types, and why some months were better than others. So people often think that sales is really easy to manage, right? It's a funnel, you just kind of put stuff in at the top and see what comes out. But it's more complicated, and measuring sales productivity is less easy than people think. The sales funnel success and KPIs are then exposed. So there's a notion of competitiveness, especially amongst salespeople, and maybe they don't want to share why they're being so successful, or even stand out. They don't want to necessarily share their secrets. And some do, some don't. But what this process did is it highlighted the employees that were very successful and allowed the managers to dive into some of the processes that they were going through and then build out best practices for the rest of the team. So the people are judged based on numbers and not just on perception of relationships and other variables that are important as well. So the end process is it helped figure out who was part of the funnel that did well in which parts, and then talk to those people so they could build out training guides for the rest of the individuals. So develop best practices, training opportunities, drove better behavior, and highlights what activities are driving star performers. So what did the star performers do more often than the rest? So getting started, next few steps is, what are you solving for? It's really important to determine what you are solving for as an organization. Build your plan from the beginning and use that to drive your next steps. So next step is to create a plan. I recommend you get a committee put together. I recommend also that you get a couple people of different job roles on the committee. I think it's great to have somebody from the exec team drive it, but it's good to have a manager, an employee, and have everybody talk about it. When we put together a a specific process in a group to go after and understand metrics better in our company, we invited people of all levels of management, from CFO all the way down to the employees that were going to be involved in data collection on the process. And we use that to power dashboards. And so we asked people what was important to them and how they would be, what questions they had in the process. So things like, what do you expect to learn? And what do you plan to do about it? Now that you have the data, how does it affect the outcome? And also decide on how much visibility you provide and how you will mitigate big brother questions. Here's the data we're gathering, here's how we're going to use it. Also to determine the roles and the rollout process. Build a project plan and make sure that everyone in the organization understands how it works. And last, for that project plan, set a schedule and communicate consistently throughout the organization. It's important so that you have a listed set of steps so you can roll it out consistently throughout the org. And last is choose your tools carefully and precisely. As indicated, some of the tools are more about collecting general data. Other tools are more about gathering and being able to provide insight. So where are some things that and questions you can get from where you are now? So again, what are you solving for? I think that's an important item to state is what is the goal? What are you going to do with the data? How are you really just trying to catch Susie? And if that's the case, then probably not the best use of everybody's time. How will this improve quality? Does it improve revenue? Does it improve culture? So look at it from those organizational perspectives. How can we measure success in another way? And how are we concerned about a leaderboard? So are we concerned about a leaderboard or excited by it? So the concept needs to be discussed in your committee. Excuse me. The concept would need to be discussed, and that committee concept is a perfect place to do it. Not only management being involved, but the employees are actually going to be judged or helped by the process. The data is important to be gathered by everybody at all levels. And lastly, there's two more. Who will own the tool in the process? So determine who in the organization is responsible for that tool and the process around the tool. And then lastly, how are we presenting it to the teams? How is it being socialized? And how management's intended goals are, as well as the stated goals, make sure those two are aligned. And we are at the end. So thank you everybody for jumping in. I'll turn it back over to Holly. Holly, if we have questions, we've got about 45 minutes left here to do some Q&A.
We do, and thank you, Brian. You did a great job there.
Thank you.
Couple questions queued up here. You did address this lightly, but I'll ask it again. What's the legality here, and does it differ by state, and if we have staff outside the U.S.?
Absolutely. So things like GDPR come to play if you're dealing with anything in Europe. I can't tell you the specifics. I'm not an attorney. If you have employees that are in the EU, you absolutely want to consult somebody who is specific in practice to GDPR. And you also want to discuss with your counsel about local, state regulatory issues that might come into play. I can tell you off the top of my head, Illinois, California, and New York all have them. I think Nevada has also started one. And if your counsel is not specifically familiar with the data privacy requirements of your state, they should be able to point you in the direction of an attorney that specializes in that particular subject matter for your state.
Next one is it common to tell the employees that you're launching this software?
I think that in a traditional implementation, people often didn't, the companies did not. And that's the trying to catch Susie example. I think that the methodology and the move forward plan is that they should. So what we're finding is companies that are engaging in using more modern productivity software are typically making it a larger conversation within the organization as opposed to implementation without rhyme or reason. So I think historically it was just put on. Now it is a full life cycle process that starts with the data, has conversations with the employees and the committee, and continues to go full life cycle.
Next one, you said the tools are not expensive. What does that mean? What kind of range are we looking at?
So on the tier 1 tools where you're collecting just data points, you're typically looking at tens of dollars, maybe $20, $30 a month per employee. Some of the more advanced software platforms, like the one for the Comcast example, is much more, it's very enterprise focused, a lot of AI, a lot of data processing, and those are much more expensive. I would call those in the $100 range, approaching that dollar amount, specific to those higher end enterprise versions of the software. On the lower end versions of kind of what I'd call tier 2, you're looking at somewhere between $40, $50, $60 a month. But they are
per user.
That is per employee. Yep. And the companies have a number of case studies that can demonstrate value even at those price points. But it's harder to justify, I think, unless you're a bigger organization, those higher end enterprise tier 2 offerings, approaching $100 per employee a month, until you become a much, much larger organization.
Okay, and last question. How long and how complex are these tools to implement?
So implementation is minutes to start at just gathering the data. So connecting Office 365 to a tool, you can hop on a Zoom call or a Teams call with the vendor, connect up and go. I think the larger part of the process is determining all the pre-work, such as how do you plan to use it as an organization, what are the goals, putting together a committee. The committee should be helping to determine what the software platform is, and you could take the goals and use that to stack rank the different offerings. So if you say, I must be able to integrate with a My Telephone system because I need to understand time on the phones as a major data component. So you got to put that in your search criteria as you're looking for new platforms. And then you could stack rank them by, this thing has 4 out of 5, and this software also has the critical must-have items in it, or 10 items or 20 items. So I think it's the legwork that you need to put in beforehand that's critical, as well as then tuning the software. And the vendors will help you do that as part of your training and implementation. And that could take a couple weeks. Not straight, but it's tweaking over time, and it's going to require some maintenance, just as any tool does. As your organization continues to evolve, you'll need to dedicate some time towards the tool to continue to optimize the data that comes out of it.
Okay. Unless anyone has any other questions, looks like we've answered all of them in the queue. So again, thank you, Brian. Great job. Super interesting topic. And for those of you still on, as I mentioned, I will be sending everyone the recording as well. So that's
Great.
it. And we will see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.